You know, folks, when people are talking about this podcast, they'll refer to it as Some Kind of Wonderful, which only makes it all the more confusing this week when we talk about the 1987 film Some Kind of Wonderful. Simon Foster, I don't know what this podcast is going to be like because often we'll come to these films which are, integral, I guess, to the foundational elements of your youth. And you were obviously in the mid-30s when you were watching it in 1987.
Calm down.
But look, I was a very young person, so I came to movies like this later in life, and a film like this, which is very much there to speak to the experience of being a younger person, sort of entering the world for the first time, I was
Sure.
always too young for it. And so I've come back to it later, and then there's a cultural disconnect. So I'm really just curious to know how this conversation is going to go this week as we talk about Some Kind of Wonderful. Is this a film that you're going to have the same reaction to that I did while watching it?
Okay, so I kind of feel I'll be taking the lead on this one a little bit because it was such an integral part of me growing up. And I should point out, not specifically Some Kind of Wonderful, which is a movie that was at the end of John Hughes's reign as the voice of teens of the 1980s. For me, The Breakfast Club was and remains a seminal movie in my upbringing. It remains one of my 5 favorite movies of all time. It spoke directly to me as a teenager in '85 that no film has before or since, and that's something that's shared across you know teenagers all over the world. By the time he got to Some Kind of Wonderful, it was only a couple of years later, but he'd handed the directing duties off to Howard Deutsch, and we'll get to more on Howard in a minute. But this was a movie that watching it again now, I can look back and say, yeah, I kind of get why I didn't love this film as much, despite feeling a sense of I really should love this film because it's a John Hughes film and I'm a John Hughes nut. It's kind of just a rehash of Pretty in Pink, which was a far superior teen movie that Hughes wrote and directed Deutsch directed prior to that. And there's a lot of inauthenticity in this. There's a lot of movie magic that's trying to be conjured here that doesn't always land. Now, I'm going to cop a little bit of flack from my fellow Gen Xers for this, but I think of all the films we've watched so far, this is the one that holds up the least.
Look, I mean, that's a pretty bold statement to make.
Yeah, it is. And I'm surprised I'm saying it because I had the soundtrack to this, I had the poster for this, I had the ultimate crush on Mary Stuart Masterson in this, and we'll get to more on what she represented to a generation as well. But watching it now through the eyes of an older person, I can see that this is a pretty flimsy bit of filmmaking.
Look, I'm not going to disagree in saying that it's a pretty flimsy bit of filmmaking. And like, I certainly didn't hate this movie, but I certainly wasn't in love with it. And I think there's a couple of problems with it, but we're going to delve into that over this next sort of half hour or so as we talk about the film. But before we get into it, can we just play the trailer so people can be a bit, a bit more familiar, a bit reminded about the world of Some Kind of Wonderful? Here we go.
I wish you guys could experience the humiliation of having the weirdest guy in a huge school be a blood relative.
Some Kind of Wonderful is funny and involving with a lot of charm, says the New York Times.
That's what my girlfriend would look like without skin.
And People magazine says it's comic and romantic, thoroughly winning.
You should consider whether or not you feel you can deliver a kiss that kills.
Some Kind of Wonderful.
I think there's one big problem with this movie. Actually, there's a few problems, but there's one that really, to me, just sort of speaks out as the problem with the movie. And the problem with the film is the lead of the film, Eric Stoltz.
Okay,
So-
now we're getting onto something here. I look, yes, do go on.
Okay.
Should we do the plot first? We really should
well-
do the plot first.
Can I'll just give my quick Eric Stoltz and then we'll
Make
get to
your
the
point,
plot
yeah.
and we'll dive back. Okay, so Eric Stoltz in this movie has zero screen chemistry with any of the leading ladies in this. When kissing Lea Thompson, she may as well have just been kissing her brother. It just does not work at all. But Simon, please, what is the plot about? Let's go.
All right. The aforementioned Eric Stoltz, he played a guy called Keith Nelson, who's this arty sort of high school outcast, the most handsome high school outcast you've ever seen. It's a classic sort of handsome outcast story. He is desperate to land a date with the popular girl Amanda Jones, who gets her own song in this, played by Lea Thompson, wife of the director, with some help from his tomboy best friend Watts, Mary Stuart Masterson. Now, his chances draw the ire of Amanda's snobby ex-boyfriend, Hardy Gents, Craig Sheffer, not Patrick Swayze, as I kept thinking it was all these years. It's Craig Sheffer.
He does look like Patrick Swayze. I had to look at him a few times trying to work out who that guy was.
Got a very Swayze-esque manner to him. He makes plans to get even with Amanda and beat up Keith to teach them both a lesson. Matters are further complicated when Watts realizes she likes Keith as more than just a friend and tries to convince him to stop pursuing Amanda. So it's a romance, but it never really fully commits to being a romance until those key moments where the music swells up. It has some awkward sort of comedy bits in there that undermine the rest of the film. I can't believe I'm being as down on this movie as I am, because
frankly, I'm shocked.
For such a long time, it was like, yeah, cool, Some Kind of Wonderful, loved it. And I can see why I loved it back in the day, because it's stylish and they're beautiful people and there's all those things that were important to a Simon in 1987. I was 2 years into my work life by that stage. I did my HSC, my high school certificate in 1985. So I was kind of out of the high school jam at that point. So maybe this movie just came along at a little bit of the wrong point for me. I always felt I had to like it without really liking it.
There is a scene that takes place towards the end of the movie where Eric Stoltz has taken Lea Thompson out on what's ostensibly a date of sorts. They're sitting there and she ends up saying to him, as she's sort of swept up in the, quasi-romance of it all, and she says,
"This is insane. It doesn't make any sense.
This just doesn't make any sense." And she's right. None of this movie makes any sense. None of the character motivations make a whole lot of sense. None of the actions taken by the characters. Like, it is just baffling from beginning to end. Like, all of it is a confected John Hughes fantasy. And he confected quite a bit of fantasy as the way that teenagers sort of engage and exist with each other. But the whole thing is that what he's doing is creating a sense of an emotional truth, even if the actual sort of behaviors of the teenagers are not how teenagers actually behave. But there's a bit of wish fulfillment in there, and that's what made him such a successful filmmaker through the mid to late 80s with a lot of these teen dramas. But certainly, I think the formula's feeling a little bit creaky by the time this one came out, and quite obviously you can sense that John Hughes felt it as well, because this is one of the last ones of these types of films that he made. Like, I think there's career opportunities that came out like 4 or 5 years later, but after this he kind of starts pivoting more towards more sort of youth-orientated things with the Home Alone films, Curly Sue, all that kind of business.
I love Curly Sue. I wish we could do a podcast on that. Look, this is a film which, returning to it after all these years, and having watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off ad infinitum over those years, there's lots of nods to Bueller in this one, whether it's the shower sing-along or the trip around the art gallery or taking your date to the upmarket restaurant. Even Jonathan Schmock, who played the maitre d' in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So you're Abe Frillman, the sausage king of Chicago. He has a small role in this as one of the car valets. So he's treading over well-trodden ground, John Hughes, with his work here. And I got the feeling that comes through in the plotting and the very rote sort of, you should go to college. Well, you're not going to go to college. I want to go to college. No one listens to me. It was very sort of surface level drama. And that was the point I wanted to make. And you absolutely nailed it. It doesn't make sense. The first half of this film is kind of just, Mary Stuart Masterson is starting to get the hots for Keith, and Keith's a working class guy who dodges trains, and it's a whole thing where, and then it gets into his motivation for getting back at Amanda and getting back at what was his name? Casper Jens or something. Hardy Jens, Craig Sheffer's character.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah,
he decides to blow his whole college fund on a pair of earrings and a big date night and buying beluga caviar for Amanda Jones, just as a way of getting back at Amanda Jones. And I'm thinking, well, that's psychopathic. Why wouldn't you just walk away and say, that bitch and that creepy guy who wants anything to do with him? Instead, he blows his whole college fund on just getting back at him. And it's in hindsight, it seems like the loopiest bit of action I've seen a main actor in a film take in a long time.
Okay, so we're about to get into the dark alternate version of this movie. So, look, so he gives a line when he gives her those earrings towards the end. He says, "Hey, look, I'm giving you my future." Now, there is a way that all of this makes sense, but it never happens in the movie. Yeah. And it goes right back to that opening scene where we see him walking along the train line and sort of playing with death by possibly walking into the train. Okay, and it's just sort of seen as, this is just a crazy thing he does. If this character is going through like a fair bit of depression and sort of teen ennui to the point where he's actually thinking about killing himself, if we reach a point where he's giving the earrings to the girl and says, "Hey, look, my entire future's on this," and the film is built around the idea of if this night doesn't play well for him, then he's probably going to off himself, then that actually all makes sense. But that's not really what the film talks about at all. And so all these things that kind of speak to this experience of teenage suicide isn't actually really present in the movie outside of a few allusions to it. Like it sort of, it sets it up, but then it never delivers or goes anywhere near that. So whether that's something that existed in the like early versions of the script where that's kind of what John Hughes wanted to start working towards and then pivoted away from that for whatever reason and other elements just remained in the script as it got developed, who knows? But it certainly feels like that's in there.
Well, that certainly would go some way to explaining why this feels like such a stalker's film. There are scenes every time something dramatic happens to two characters. There's a third character who seems to be watching them. That the camera does a dolly zoom sort of in on their face, and that happens like 7 or 8 times in the first half of this film. That everyone seems to be watching everyone else go through their lives, and it's an absolute stalker version of a love story that may have been played better if it had gone darker, but dark just wasn't. Other than some great writing in The Breakfast Club, dark just wasn't what John Hughes did.
Yeah, and look, part of it is because Eric Stoltz just isn't really bright enough doesn't really quite sound right, but in terms of, like a levity to his performance, like he's just generally, I think, a much sort of darker performer, and so that really just gives us a menace. So I don't think it might have been there if it was look, I was reading through the notes, and apparently originally, and in what we're going to head into right now, apparently there was the original sort of consideration of one Michael J. Fox, because you can't get through one of our 1987 podcasts without talking about Michael J. Fox. Apparently he was the person they were actually really after for this lead role. And I think it would have made sense with him in that role because he brings that levity and sense of boyish humanity to it, where Eric Stoltz brings a, disturbed young man element to this.
Okay, so Eric Stoltz, very handsome. Camera loves him in this. Very dull. Not really that much of a leading man presence. This was his first big leading role. He'd done Fast Times in Ridgemont High and The Wildlife to...
Sorry, can you amend an ish to that?
Ish, yes. And he'd had a lot of success under the makeup in Mask opposite Cher, so he was an actor of some renown at this point, although nobody'd really seen his face. So this is very much his leading man debut, and the camera loves him for it. But we can't talk about this. I did find myself asking the question over and over again, how did he perform in Back to the Future? Because Eric Stoltz, as you know, was the original Marty McFly for a couple of weeks and then they fired him. And I totally get why they fired him, because his moments of trying to be light in this do not convince.
Yeah, so look, my understanding was that he played the role just a lot sort of more serious because he saw it more as a serious movie than the film that it turned out to be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and obviously wasn't necessarily in line with the thinking that Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale had.
Yep.
When they were crafting the film. So look, they bumped them off the film, and when you see this film and what this could have been with a lighter presence in it, like it just kind of all the things that you assume about Eric Stoltz in Back to the Future kind of are shown here on the page.
Absolutely. Yeah. And obviously we're coming to this in hindsight. We didn't know this at the time. The internet is flooded with those scenes from Back to the Future where they're out there to have a look at, and I'll probably stick some in the newsletter when this goes out. But it's it was a clear why they wouldn't have got the Back to the Future they wanted with Eric Stoltz in the lead.
Sorry, we can't get away from just pointing out the fact that Eric Stoltz, obviously, in that was appearing opposite Lea Thompson,
Boom.
and
That's
is
where I'm
again
going.
here.
Yep.
Yeah, is again here, obviously playing opposite against Lea Thompson. Hence my little joke about he may as well have been kissing her brother.
Nice. That passed me by. That was a good joke.
Yeah.
Lea Thompson. Really lovely on screen, but does some of the big sort of scenery chewing moments. I forgot what a snotty film this was. Everyone's crying in this film. Everyone's got a shiny top lip and tears rolling down their faces at what seems like the most not that the stakes weren't very high in this film on anything.
They're teenagers, come on.
They're teenagers, they cry. I know, that's true. It's the hormones. Lea Thompson, a lot of hair. She had good hair in this. Everyone had great hair in this. I got into a deep dive on the internet because we noticed when we were watching this last night that his hair changes from scene to scene. Eric Stoltz's hair is one. Then first it's one color. Then when he's having the fight at the end with Hardy Jens, it turns another color and all buffs out. And 1 minute he's got a haircut. And I thought, and we started to have a bit of a giggle at this. And then I did an internet deep dive. And sure enough, there are all these forums about how Eric Stoltz's hair changes in some kind of wonderful. It's so bizarre. It's become this little sort of internet meme in itself. The changing hairstyles of Eric Stoltz. But there's great hair throughout this movie. I love, and we're going to get on to Mary Stuart Masterson soon, the buzz cut that she had, the tight sort of thing. Big fan of Mary Stuart Masterson, and she remains, and jumping ahead, she's my MVP quite clearly in this.
Yeah, well, she's kind of the only character and only actor in this who really actually sort of works in the movie. So look, just getting back to Lea Thompson. Yes. I don't think she's particularly amazing in this movie, but she's fine. She's serviceable. Yeah. I think she's legitimately great in Back to the Future, and then she's just kind of just fine in this, and obviously fantastic again in Carolyn in the City in the '90s. But that's neither here nor there.
Yep.
But Mary Stuart Masterson, I think, is fantastic in this, and I'd say the only good scene in the entire movie, literally the only good scene, is the one that has her in the car garage trying to get him to kiss her.
Oh, for sure.
Under the sort of pretense of, you kind of want to boost up your kissing skills if you're going to be going out with a girl like Lea Thompson's character.
Yep.
And so, there's, I talked about how Eric Stoltz has zero screen chemistry on screen. He actually has some chemistry in that scene with her, and the scene's a little bit hot, and it kind of works. But outside of that, nothing in this film is really
she has some lovely close-ups. She has some lovely throwaway lines. She has, she says, it must be a drag to be a slave to the male sex drive. She has, and then directly from that quote, it goes into the now, well, I was going to say famous, maybe infamous girls' locker room scene where Lea Thompson's stretching out like she's some sort of thoroughbred horse. But it's a.
Sorry, is that line from your wife? That sounds like something that she would have said.
No, she does have a line regarding the painting of Lea Thompson in the end where she said it looks like Corey Feldman, which I did tell her was going in the podcast. So thank you to that one. No, that was one I just made up then. Mary Stuart Masterson is afforded, or certainly makes the most of, the best lines in the movie. Someone else we should mention, and I remember him being in the film more than he was, is Elias Koteas as Duncan, the punk with the heart of gold who sort of helps Eric Stoltz's character after being in conflict with him. Yes, he has a couple of very unpleasant moments at the start where he rags on her for being, appearing to be a lesbian, and he uses the F word. But by the end of the film, he comes right around and has that great moment where he enters the party and kind of takes everything up a level. So big fan of Elias Koteas, and he was always kind of De Niro light for a lot of people. You could see him trying to channel De Niro, but he was very good in this.
Yeah, and obviously just 2 years later went on to working in one of the most successful independent films of all time, as Casey Jones in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh boy, here we go. I wonder when we'd get to the Ninja Turtles of the 80s.
Had to be mentioned at some point. Look, just getting back to the idea of the way that Mary... sorry, what's her name again? It's
Mary Stuart Masterson.
Mary Stuart Masterson. I always want to say Mary Louise, and I'm getting confused by Mary Louise Parker's. Mary Stuart Masterson, she obviously is queer-coded within this, and the film would have been so much more interesting if it was about her and about her finding some sort of, way into her sexuality. Like maybe, she sort of codes as queer, but is actually sort of heterosexual, and how that sort of plays into her life. Like, that'd be kind of a bit interesting, because it's only when
Yes.
she's on screen that she's actually fairly sort of magnetic. And, it's 1987. We're not going to get a film about her sort of discovering her sexuality in 1987. That's just
And
not going
it's
to happen.
and it's John Hughes, for whom anything other than a white middle class upbringing,
Upper middle class.
upper middle class Chicago
Mm.
upbringing, although this is all set in LA, but he was very much of that milieu, was never going to get a look in there. In fact, this film comes dangerously close to Ali Sheedying Mary Stuart Masterson. I'm referring to the end of The Breakfast Club, where the coolest character in The Breakfast Club, Ali Sheedy, is given a full makeover to look like a prim and proper princess, which is John Hughes's version of the perfect teenage girl. When Mary Stuart Masterson sort of takes all her jewelry off to become the chauffeur, such a strange.
Yeah, but like
That
in
was
the
so bizarre.
in the chauffeur, like she's not sort of playing in like sort of feminine garb there at all. Like she's dressed in a very sort of
Sure.
masculine outfit. So again, it's that sort of queer coding
Yeah.
existent within the film.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and like there's the scene where we're being bored silly by Eric Stoltz on the date with Lea Thompson, but then it sort of cuts to outside the restaurant. You see Mary Stuart Masterson outside playing. Is it craps? Is that what you call like the
I
sort of
think
dice
so.
game? And
Yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah. And betting against like the valets and everyone working at the restaurant. Like that scene's actually kind of fun. And it's any time that she's off by herself that the film's actually like fairly watchable. But it's
Yes.
just, it's not about her enough for that to really sort of to cut through.
One of the joys of this film is the great support cast. Molly Hagan as
Yes,
Shane.
the great Molly Hagan, her
Yep.
claim to fame being Simon.
She's the nun that falls for Kramer's Kavorka in that
No,
episode of
I mean,
Seinfeld.
she is, but that's not her claim to fame. Her claim to fame is for 4 seasons on the Fox Broadcasting Channel. She played the character of, I think it's Empathy in Herman's Head.
Okay, so my wife brought up this, and she was apparently, I didn't know this after being with her for 17 years. She's a big Herman's Head fan. Now, I've never seen an episode of Herman's Head, so I didn't know this.
Highly underrated, fantastic, terrible sitcom.
Yes, understandable. Great cast. Maddie Corman's in there as Laura, the daughter with the big buck teeth. You recognise her from the last 30 years of Character Pass. Candace Cameron getting a couple of funny scenes as that sort of smart sort of younger sister thing. She does all that dinner table stuff.
So this would have been, I haven't checked the chronology exactly, but this would have been recorded just before going on to Full House.
Under Full House, exactly. I remember Scott Coffey being in this a lot more than he was. Scott Coffey was the punk-haired redhead guy who had the cigarette behind his ear, who Mary Stuart Masterson uses as sort of the diversionary date. He does have one line which made me laugh. She says it's 1987, girls can be whatever they want to be. And he says, I know, my mum's a plumber.
Yep.
I must admit, I just laughed out loud when he said that. That was a great delivery.
A lot of guys I know think that you're
What?
confused.
Oh.
See, but I know it's just an act. Do you know how I know?
Enlighten me.
Because you radiate this sexual vibe. And if you wanted to, you could be a girl like that.
Ray, this is 1987. Did you know that a girl can be whatever she wants to be?
I know, my mom's a plumber.
No, that is funny, and that scene is actually really properly funny and charming.
Yeah,
and again, it's that thing of whenever she's sort of out by herself, involved in like her world, like the film kind of actually starts working, and so her character encounters characters like him, and it just worked. But yeah, the rest of it's
not so much. And there in the background, being just a pretty face and never getting a line, was Chynna Phillips, who we know from the Wilson Phillips Band, in an early role for her. Very pretty, but you never heard her voice, so that's a shame. We've mentioned Eric's hair. I had that. Still can't get over that. Yeah, look, I'm kind of just worked through here. I've worked through all my observations. I started taking notes like I normally do with this, but I just kind of ran out of interest in the film.
Here's 2 things I wanted to flag, so let's wrap this up shortly.
All right.
Okay, so look, first of all, you mentioned the song Miss Amanda Jones.
Yes.
Okay, the way you spoke of it, I don't know if you really know much about this song. It's not, the song was, the character Amanda Jones, who is the character that Lea Thompson plays in this one, the song wasn't written for the film. Okay, the Amanda Jones character is named after the song, and it's a Rolling Stones song from the 60s that's provided here as a cover version. Okay, and there's like this musical montage where, I mean, that's a great song. Okay, and even the cover version of it is pretty strong. Okay, but during that, and this is another thing that just doesn't work in the film, like it's as though there's a whole bunch of ideas that might kind of work if they thought it through a little bit more, but it all just feels a bit undercooked. Okay, that entire montage, it's the song is Miss Amanda Jones. Okay, the montage should be about Amanda Jones, but it's not. It's about Eric Stoltz's, all the characters sort of in his orbit and what they're up to for like the couple of minutes of the montage. Okay, it should be about her, like out in a world, and you see her, like a glimpse into her world and what that really means, but you don't see that, and it's weird. Like this perspective on it's completely screwy.
I remember. Sorry, I was just going to say that the soundtrack, Hughes was famous for choosing great songs and making the soundtracks really work. I thought this was a very underwhelming soundtrack in hindsight, which is odd because I had the LP. Look it up, kids. I had the vinyl, and I still do somewhere packed away. So like I said, there was a sense of duty on my part to just really like this film because it's a John Hughes film, and I can recognize that now. I do want to mention very quickly the great opening sequence, the credit sequence.
Where can we just talk about just music just before we sort of opening sequence? The other thing as well is that you've got the cover version at the very end of Can't Help Falling in Love by I think they're an English band called Lick the Tins. Terrible cover version.
Awful way to end the film.
Oh, look, I think it's a great song, but yeah, like, I mean, who doesn't like an Elvis track? But terrible cover version, and apparently that was the biggest song they had, so I don't know how successful it actually was for them, but boy, it was an odd choice to end the film.
I'm sort of doubling back here just to mention the opening credit sequence. We are introduced to her love heart snare drum, which I clearly felt was some kind of symbolism. Her heart takes a beating in this film, and the film starts off with that as well. So there was some film language at work there for you academics out there. And we can't really end this sort of observation without mentioning the late great John Ashton, who plays Eric Stoltz's father in this, most famous, I guess, for Beverly Hills Cop and Midnight Run. He passed away earlier this year.
Last year,
exactly, yes. He has a lot of trouble coming to terms with the fact that there's co-ed phys ed, which does seem very 1987 because that's kind of a thing now. The question I like to pose, is there a pink sweater? No, the colour palette for this film is very working class, lots of dark blues and greys and a lot of autumn colours, so no, I couldn't see a pink sweater in this. This movie took $18.5 million at the US box office. It was released February 27, so we've doubled back a bit on that after last week's Lethal Weapon episode. So we're back a week. We're going to sort things out in the edit. That equates to $51.5 million in 2024 dollars. I just want to pose this to you, Dan Barrett.
Yeah, sure.
That made it the 58th highest grossing film of 1987. Let's leap forward to 2024. The movie this year that took $51.5 million at the US box office was Zendaya in Challengers, the tennis film. It came in 39th on the box office chart of 2024. So that gives some indication of how you could still sort of crack $50 million at the US box office back in 1987, but you wouldn't going to be in the running for any kind of box office award. In 2024, you're the 39th top grossing film.
Ordinarily, I'd actually be really interested in that as a stat, but I think that 2024 was a unusual film in terms of volume of movies and releases, so that could actually play a big role into it.
Yeah, okay. You and I agree that the most memorable scene is the kiss, and the most valuable player is Mary Stuart Masterson in this.
Or Molly Hagan.
Or Molly Hagan in the few moments she has. Recommend to watch. Should people be watching this? Any final thoughts?
I do have a final thought, and you mentioned the magical words a few moments ago, Lethal Weapon. So part of this film doesn't work purely because the end of it just doesn't make a lick of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, but can I propose this as an alternate ending to the movie?
Okay.
What's the name of the Craig Sheffer character again? Hunter?
Hardy Jens.
Hardy Jens. Okay. So they end up in the party house, okay, and there's a fight that's going to take place inside the house between Eric Stoltz's character and Hardy Jens. What if, instead of the fight not actually ever end up happening and the biker gang all sort of wandering in, What if they take the fight outside onto the lawn? Because this is a Los Angeles set film. They take the fight out onto the lawn. It ends with Eric Stoltz fighting Hardy Jens out on the lawn, shirtless, while the LAPD watch on.
Someone's got to crack open a fire hydrant and everything's just happening as it should. That would be awesome. See,
Yeah.
why aren't you writing these films? You would see, you're before your time. You really are.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I'm before my time. I think I'm probably like 30 years too late here, Simon.
Recommend to watch. Look, if you're under 20, feeling lovelorn, it's a rainy Saturday afternoon, sure, whack it on. You're not going to hate it too much, but this is far from anyone's best work, except maybe Mary Stuart Masterson. She deserved better.
So last week, I think I even said this on the podcast when we were talking about Lethal Weapon. I didn't think I'd ever seen this movie before. I have seen this film before. I was watching it going, no, I've absolutely seen this movie. I didn't remember it particularly that well, but I know that I've seen this. I would have watched it when I was in my sort of late teens, renting out, like 10 movies across a weekend, like the, 10 movies for $10 sort of VHS sort of thing. And so I probably watched this at like 2 o'clock in the morning after watching like 4 films previously, another 3 films after that. So
they were great days, weren't they? Weren't they
when
great
you could just do
days?
that. Yeah. So look, I would have seen it. I know why I don't remember this movie on account of the fact that the film's just not particularly great, and I would have watched it under those sort of circumstances. Okay, so you've got that. But if you were watching it for the reason I would have watched it at the time, which is to get a bit of completionism around like John Hughes movies, I think that this is absolutely a must watch. You need to get through it for that. But as a just entertainment on its own, I think you do much better.
I saw this as part of a double feature at, I want to say Blackdown Drive-In. It might have been Dundas Drive-In. This was playing with Beverly Hills Cop 2. This was the first time I saw it. I saw it many times since on VHS, of course. I took a date to the drive-in, thought I had a shot. She fell asleep. That's kind of the story of my teenage romances.
Did that happen often?
Yeah, well, you have no idea how often that happened. And I just sort of stared at Mary Stuart Masterson for most of this and then forgot all about it. Okay, so what are we doing next week? Do you remember? I think it's Angel Heart.
I believe it is Angel Heart. Which
That is
a film
very
that
exciting.
I 100% haven't seen this, and I didn't even know anything about the movie up until last night when I opened up the Wikipedia. It sounds pretty cool. I'm very much up for this.
Yes, well, we're right in my cove here. Actually, in fact, I only watched this a couple of years ago. We bought the 4K Blu-ray or whatever they're called, so I'm going to watch it again on that, and I'm very excited to be watching it. It's a nutty film. All right, my friend, that's the end of Best Movie Year. Oh, well, we should each ask, the premise of this podcast is, out of the 100 films we're watching, does Some Kind of Wonderful make an argument for 1987 being the best year ever?
No, but I think that it is, if you wanted to understand 1987, I think that it's probably a good film for that in terms of a cultural, contextual piece.
Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. All right, my friend. Talk to you next week.
See you then.